When I returned to Australia, I felt that it was paramount to make major changes to my day-to-day existence. I no longer had a family, and my government employment was no longer available due to new policies which the current political party was implementing. Although I could continue lecturing on a sessional basis at the university, I had to be prepared for new and unexpected circumstances. Furthermore, I was assaulted several times and was often told by those assailants and ex-boyfriends she had paid to hurt me that I deserved to die. Without knowing what my so-called grave mistakes were, I obviously needed to make a few drastic changes, and I elected to start something different. After some research, I decided to settle in Western Australia. Perth had a very interesting reputation, and everybody contemplating traveling to Australia was subjected to excessive propaganda about the charms of the city. My returning to Australia had to have a good reason, and settling in Perth might be the change I needed. But what was I going to do there? I thought perhaps I could open a shop. It could be an art materials one, where I could display my own and other local artists' works, as I did once before. I could also conduct art classes for the young, and even encourage schools to have their students' work displayed. I could be part of a new art movement. There were some suburbs in Perth which were more suitable for art exhibitions, and Fremantle, Subiaco, and Victoria Park came very close, with a number of marketplaces, eateries, tattooists, photographic studios, and art shops. Perth seemed to have become the most popular destination for the English and Scots. In London, hopeful immigrants were talking about its weather and perceived similarities to the English ethos. That part of Australia could therefore be a nice start. However, there was something else drawing me there, almost physically forcing me to go to Western Australia. Some might think of it as magic, but I say it was deeper than that. It was almost like the cry of a young heart, lost in the desert, calling me to the rescue. It was almost singing in my ears emotionally, as if asking me where I was. It was like the voice of a young boy crying and asking me why I had abandoned him. It was so extraordinary and so unusual that it made me cry, and this went on for a very long time. When I finally decided to go to Perth, the cries I had heard so often turned to laughter, and this was like confirmation that it was a good decision on my part. Maybe I was tapping into some other aspects of existence which was not yet discovered, or it was due to my psychological state at the time. But I could not comprehend why I particularly chose Perth. I had no friends there, and certainly no family, as they had abandoned me when I lived in Melbourne. I would eventually discover what the universe was relaying to me. I was yet to learn much later that Magda had settled there after abducting the children. In other words, taking them away from the influence of the worldly devil worshipper that was me. Before my London adventure, I took a number of bus trips to Perth, and my very first journey from Melbourne over the Nullarbor proved to be extraordinary. I was discovering a road trip which took 3 days to Perth. On the way, passengers were made to feel very comfortable and encouraged to walk around as little as possible, although young mothers and others often needed to use the restroom at the back of the bus. Music streamed through the sound system was appealing to only a few people, and I could do without it. People's excited speech, just like the waves of the ocean, were rising up to a crescendo, and dying down repeatedly, drowned out by other naturally present sounds. Some people displayed their habitual traits, while some drunken youths and even mature-aged people made complete fools of themselves. One could easily see the validity of the saying, "There is no fool like an old fool." There were children and families, and some preferred to sleep throughout the journey. When the bus stopped at the in-between stations, where one could get out, enjoy refreshments, wash oneself, and be able to walk for a short time, it proved to be a great change from the devastating consequences of sitting for long hours. Otherwise, it could be agonizing for anyone's circulatory system. In my case, I prefer to create every possible but good excuse, such as organizing the passengers to change seats from time to time to get to know each other better, and then return back to their original seat, thus helping them to move their legs. Interestingly, they all enjoyed this unusual game, and both drivers did not worry about this. For some reason, I loved organizing little programs for people around me to feel comfortable and enjoy the experience. I took lots of photographs, chatted with people, and listened to their stories. There were also those who preferred to continue telling dirty jokes, and it seemed they did not know any better. Since they were happy with their game of words, I left them to their own devices as long as the children and young mothers were not affected. The atmosphere was very friendly and happy, although the air conditioners were noisy, and some folks still kept going with their sexually oriented jokes, making a few people, including myself, feel uncomfortable. It was a unique gathering of people who occasionally sang a few country and Western-style songs, creating a country atmosphere. Personally, I enjoyed my short break for lunch in Adelaide and walk into the city centre. I remember how very dusty the roads were. The weather was very hot, and the temperature felt like rising even higher. The people on the streets and in the restaurants were very friendly. One could greet them and be responded to, just as in other parts of Australia. Alas, in some parts of the world, if one attempted to greet a stranger, they would usually either be completely ignored or else chastised. I have come across such people in Germany, England, and even in Melbourne. But the city of Adelaide was different. Adelaide's people were friendly, and surprisingly, the number of people I met there were of Germanic background. Practicing my German was a great delight. My impression of this great city of cathedrals always remains as being a very cultural, artistic one, while retaining its uniquely Australian character. In fact, I thought I might make Adelaide my home one day. Now, everybody refreshed and back on board the bus, we began to traverse the long and typically monotonous Nullarbor. Some kept going with their songs and supposed jokes. Others entertained fellow passengers with their laughter, and sometimes with utter nonsense. There were those who preferred reading their newspapers, which they had probably already read a few times over, and some chose to sleep. Many of them were returning home after visiting Melbourne or Sydney. There were others who were going on holiday, and those who were seeking employment anywhere in Western Australia, even within the mining sector. I, on the other hand, was one of the odd numbers, going for a visit and discovery. Whichever way one observed the Nullarbor, everything looked just the same, except for kangaroos, some of which with their young hopped around the bus from time to time. Some people told me that a few of them got killed on the roads. Obviously, a speeding bus could not stop for a kangaroo. When we arrived at places like Ceduna, Coolgardie, and Kalgoorlie, meeting native Australians was a highlight of my journey. Although we had been warned against meeting them, and I was yet to understand why, I was determined to speak to at least one of them. A kind Indigenous woman introduced me to her sons, and I noticed how respectful they were towards her. She was also probably one of the tribal elders, or held some important position. We were told not to offer them any money, which they sometimes demanded, but I found giving them a little gift even before they asked for anything was very gratifying. Seeing the eyes of young children laugh with joy was the greatest treasure. I was soon surrounded by more children with their glowing eyes, dark brown skin, and unusually orange-red hair. Soon I had to catch the bus, but they all invited me back to their home, and I decided to visit them sometime in the future. Maybe they sensed how keenly I was interested in spending some time with them, discovering about their unique culture, and if I could be of any help for their children's need for education and sports or medical needs, I would be happy. A couple of other native ladies and a gentleman approached me before I left, asking if I was interested in staying with their tribe, as they wanted to introduce me to two beautiful girls. It was not my interest. However, I told them I was going to come back, upon which the lady who greeted me initially said that they felt something about me only I could understand, and they had a feeling I was their white brother. I needed to tell them exactly how I felt, and several months later I kept my promise and was greeted as their white brother. Back at the bus station and restaurant, I needed a nice cup of tea and snack. There were many passengers enjoying hot drinks and barbecued kangaroo steaks. There were also a number of motorbike riders dining. I ordered a cup of tea with jam and scones, as nothing else appealed to me. Alas, I regretted getting those items, for my tea was made with seawater and was extraordinarily salty. I took a sip and immediately returned it back. The girl looked amused and said I should specify whether I wanted the normal cup, as locals enjoyed, or bottled water if I wanted a cup of tea, as we were accustomed in the East. I certainly enjoyed my tea made with bottled water, which cost an additional few cents. One of the bikers, having noticed my dilemma, asked if I was new in the area and explained that drinking salty water was normal here. My journey was very educational indeed. Another bikie standing next to me, noticing my curiosity, told me he hoped that my previous drink did not taste like being made of urine. I told him I was not familiar with the taste of urine, and could not tell him which was which, and bottled water was fine. "Nay," said that young man, "don't worry, we don't use piss here to make our tea, mate," and everybody started to laugh. Obviously it was meant to be a joke. Finally, arriving in Perth, I took a metropolitan bus trip into the centre of the city, which did not take long. Soon I was looking around, trying to see where the city centre was, and thought I must have arrived in the outskirts of Perth. I looked at some shopping arcades, a small number of tall buildings, but I could not recognize Perth as seen in images of the city as shown on television or in newspapers. I could certainly not compare it with others like Sydney and Melbourne. For a brief moment I felt lost. I also thought that this was probably a small portion of the city. Noticing a young police cadet nearby, I asked him if he could direct me to where the city centre was. He looked at me and started to laugh, saying, "So, you are new to our lovely city?" I answered him with yes, and I heard so many good things about Perth. I have also seen many beautiful images of this great city. Here I am. His colleague arrived, saying, "Welcome to Perth, sir." The other officer then told me that I was right in the center of the city. I asked them if they had been to Melbourne. They had not, but were thinking of visiting. When I told them that I had just arrived from Melbourne and was thinking of staying in this magnificent city for a while, they were extremely happy about it. I further told them about my interest in finding a place to live and hopefully be employed as a lecturer in one of their universities. Then I asked where I could have a good breakfast and cup of real coffee. Both directed me to the Carillon. Very curiously, I walked there, wanting to try my first cup of Perth coffee at the very first coffee shop which appealed to me. I felt all alone, knowing no one. Of course, I could start everything anew, but was I really alone? I could make new friends and help people discover the little jewels we as humans have in our hearts by teaching art or by lecturing at one of the well-known establishments there. For a brief moment, I drifted into a world of daydreaming while sipping on my coffee. I remembered a Bible story where an olden Hebrew patriarch has been mentioned and whose daughters gave him wine, and he was so drunk. If the story was at all true, had his daughters any respect towards their father? Then I pondered that obviously my first daughter had no respect for me, especially since her abduction all those years ago. Psychologically, it is a well-documented reality that memories can be easily altered, and new memories of positive or negative kind can be placed in a normal functioning mind. Unfortunately, my daughters had become so bitter and hateful towards me, making me wonder why she chose to stay with me in the first place. Why did she want to destroy my reputation? It puzzles me even today. Those who interfered with her mind at such a young age have indeed caused great harm, as they have with so many other people. If anyone asked her why she hated her father so much, she would invent all sorts of make-believe stories. She was so badly influenced to believe her father was a terrible person. I cannot imagine Annette today changing her mind. My other daughter was also similarly influenced to consider me almost as if I was a stranger, her mind molded by her sister and mother that this man could not be trusted, and he was allegedly practicing black art. The science of psychology was considered by a few incapable of thinking for themselves as practicing occultism, and my beloved daughters' young minds were twisted to believe they have seen me casting spells and conjuring up spirits. False memories were created for them so conveniently that what they might have seen elsewhere or been told by others with great imaginations were superimposed onto my persona. Many years passed, and having no chance to have it clarified as to what the reality was, they remained with what became their integral memories, believing it to be the only truth. Years later, I was still discovering more of their accusations of me, with a multitude of wrongs, without knowing the facts, instead parroting their mother's words. Again, I will avoid sounding as if I was blaming Magda entirely, as she was completely mind-controlled by the real evildoers. It seemed that they knew me better in their dreamt of reality of things. They insistently condemned me. It seemed that they knew me better in their dreamt of assumptions than myself. No matter how hard I tried to explain the reality of things, they insistently condemned me, but I did not know what reason I would have to lie or be dishonest. I will say that after all the proof evidence all over the world about all the lies witnesses have been discovered preaching, they need to hide their own untruths by blaming others for lying. I am proud to have rejected all kinds of absurdity, for this has never been a part of my personal principles. Likewise, I never wanted to see any adult treating the young inappropriately because of my allegedly being an alchemist, and worse still, an atheist. questioning the spirit for which I was disfellowshipped by Magda's fellow brothers, as if I was one of them, whereas I never was. I never supported the archaic Jehovah's Witness beliefs about women as subservient and second-class citizens. This is also why I cannot accept their so-called truth, which declares that both genders are equal, while denying women's rights we observe today. What they preach can, therefore, only be a lie. As I was described being wicked due to ungrounded accusations of some people, without the ability to think, one needs to question why all my friends and neighbors chose to leave their children with me when they had important engagements or doctor's appointments to attend. I even had primary school, kindergarten responsibilities to assist teachers and parents after a thorough police investigation of my background. I was a fully trusted member of society. It seemed that my once-upon-a-time sweetheart was determined to punish me through her children for the sins she thought I might have committed. She was in truth only pleasing her faithful brothers and sisters. Remember also that her daughters had continually been making up stories about me, loosely relaying those untruths to their mother. I am certain that they only wanted to help her feel good about her ungrounded suspicions, born of my supposed wickedness. Noticing how happy she felt about her alleged knowledge of my character due to the racial differences I presented. My accent was yet another issue in her eyes, for as far as she was concerned, I could not even form complete sentences and make sense. Because the witnesses happily talked about my assumed characteristics of being a servant of the devil due to being righteously disfellowshipped, or just being me, I had to be portrayed as someone opposing God and therefore evil. This was repeated so often that it created a hypnotic effect in Magda's daughters' minds. Obviously, their mother's teachings were more important to them. Now their minds were so conditioned to see me as the all-evil, conjuring up evil spirits and casting evil spells. Lies they created about me over the years became their integral reality during the time they spent with Magda. In her completely naive state of mind, their mother took their lies as truth and further strengthened their invented and accusative references as the only reality. Evidently, they had never believed in me in the first place, and certainly never cared to know anything about my true identity. Repeating, in their eyes I was a liar, and their mother could only speak the truth as a faithful servant. However, in the face of real truth, one wonders how they could live with their treacherous lies and pretensions. Maybe Birgit also has an answer to that. Remember, for every action, there is a reaction. If there is a real God, known as Jehovah, and not created by men, would he believe in those lies and punish someone forever being accused by them? If that God was truly righteous without displaying human characteristics, would he not show those accusers the right way of thinking? Remember, God is portrayed in the Bible as being almighty and all-righteous, commanding his servants to worship him in truth and righteousness. Throughout their existence, the witnesses have presented a tenet uniquely theirs, but in the process their deeds have destroyed so many people who trusted them. By doing what they do, it can only be a reflection of who their God actually is. The whole story was like a nightmare, which kept repeating just the way I have been repeating these memories. In the circumstances, it was better to forgive and let them go. Let their God deal with them. Perhaps they should read their Bible more prudently and open-mindedly before committing themselves into the great sin of being totally self-righteous. As confirmed years later, What I used to hear about Magda's discipline of the children was proved true. Even Birgit, a long time after, separating herself from me on advice given to her by the person who supposedly could only tell the truth, told me likewise, and those words still remain fresh in my mind. Your dad married me in the truth, making me believe in his deceits. But she was only studying their faith when we met, and was certainly not in their truth. He behaved as if he was in the truth, and for many years living in his lies. He was living a life of dishonesties. You see, he is very evil, and all evil is as good as dead in the eyes of my God. Therefore, as far as I am concerned, he is as good as dead. This is probably why she needed to consider me physically dead, as justified in her Jehovah's Witness-owned mind. Was she not judging me? Was Birgit telling me the truth? In reality, my supposed conjuring up of spirits and casting evil spells originates from Magda. Like her daughters, she felt the need to listen to advice given by her friends. Even completely innocent jokes were taken as serious facts. And the stories she had been told by her divine and wise brothers became her reality. She accepted her brothers' and sisters' ungrounded advice unconditionally. In return, she made use of every opportunity to influence Birgit and Claude, allegedly disciplining them. She was studying with her witness brothers the Word of God when we first met in Germany, but she was not a baptized member of their organization. Neither was she in their supposed truth. Magda, the servant of Jehovah's Witness organization, just like her faithful associates, was absorbed into their society without any room to question, believing everything which was often repeated, so that it created a hypnotic sleep state she was lulled into. The situation was so bad that she could not see what falsehoods she was exposed to. Now, any lie would be fine to accept as true. Remember what Jehovah's Witnesses prophesied in regard to the end of the world. It was going to be within the lifetime of this generation who experienced 1914, and yet many have died due to the natural span of their lives. What happened to Armageddon and the promised paradise? I was happy to have stored or temporarily passed most of my belongings to trustworthy friends as a precautionary measure, shortly before the absolute finalization of things with my nightmares. I was warned that anything I worked so hard to obtain might be passed on to people who had no appreciation of me. Bearing in mind what the Strohbachs had demonstrated and my young daughter Birgit had attempted to do, I did not desire my belongings to be burnt, for they had all convinced themselves to believe that I was casting spells. Feeling completely shocked about such treatment from my closest, years later I learned that they, particularly Birgit, believed that I was still telling stories, and that she could tell when her father was doing so. In truth, my daughters have always ignored me and convinced themselves that the dad they have created in their own small minds was dishonest and untruthful. However, the person they considered being evil lived only in their imagination. I was not the evil one, as they assumed and judged me, while claiming that nobody amongst them, the Jehovah's Witnesses, judges anybody. What does a judicial committee stand for, and what do their shunning policies promote? They should revisit Psalm chapter 50, verse 6, where it is written, And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Those memories still echo in my mind when only a single thought triggers them to the surface in all their clarity. I can never forget how those witness friends were anti-me, anti any type of education. For example, during my academic exams, they knew the importance of attending them, yet they were demanding that I went house to house instead, advising that I could attend those exams tomorrow or next week. Needless to say, I did not fall in with their demands and set my exams, for which they chastised me. Going forward in time, initially there was a suggestion that my wealth needed to be divided on a 50-50 basis. But because the children preferred to stay with their mother after they left, it would now be 90% to Magda and 10% to me. I already had enough losses and had nothing else left to share. I did not desire to have anything that was mine burned or shared with those who so lightly disfellowshipped me. Furthermore, Magda did not wish to be materialistic anyway. What they have left me with was naught else but agony, disillusionment, and misery. I was forced into a dull emotional coma for a very long time. For a very long time, I walked the streets like a zombie, but I survived. What I am saying must not be taken as if I am trying to get all that attention for myself, but rather show the world what the witnesses do to many others like me. Some people upholding principles of the Jehovah's supposed organization thought I must be on habit-forming drugs. For them, I must have appeared so miserable, so fatigued and sleepless, and by looking at my sleepy eyes and slow movements, they formed their own opinions. I had to separate myself from such people with their categorizations and group mentality. My ex-wife and children belonged to this mindset, and I could not accept such swarm intelligence. I preferred to remain an individual and not the puppet of a cult. My attitude was exactly the same when I lived in Toorak and Elwood with my children, when they were innocent and happy, enjoying their childhood. I still remember those beautiful times when looking at their schoolbooks, notebooks, and artwork. I also remember Magda's intriguing wisdom, although sometimes using different words, but always meaning the same, as she often declared. If someone tells me something untrue, and I speak about it to others because I believe it to be right, nobody can blame me for telling lies. I expected that anybody hearing something untrue would need to be cautious before preaching about it as the truth. That attitude never ceases to amaze me. When living in Elwood with my children as a sole parent, I met a number of lovely people, or so I thought. There was an immediate need for $500 for legal costs due to my much-anticipated separation from Magda and issues in relation to the custody of the children. A newly introduced friend volunteered to help me, and in return I was to build a quality sound system for him to use in his van. In my confusion, I thought it to be a good arrangement. His offer assisted me to make the burden I was likely to have just a little lighter, and I was very grateful for that. I built the sound system using the latest innovations, and he happily had it installed in his van. Whatever he was going to use it for was his business, but I knew he would probably play very loud music for a group of people gathered in the outdoors to meditate, as he once explained. He was an organist and an eccentric, also interested in building his own electronic pipe organ. For many months I did not hear anything from him, and assumed he was still happy with everything, but one day he visited us, completely devastated. The equipment I initially created was stolen, and he believed that it was under some form of guarantee, not only for electronics failure, but also for theft, and thought I was obliged to replace the equipment. One could not imagine what he thought of me, perhaps judging me by his previous experiences, but knowing my nature, I was willing to build another one for him. Many other friends, however, warned me against it, and he kept pestering me on a daily basis, demanding the immediate return of his payment of $500. I was very much willing to return his money, but then again, other friends, including Reg, strongly advised me against it. I never wanted to hurt anybody in any way. It was going to be very hard for me to stick to the rules of the land. I was already experiencing a time of complete breakdown, primarily due to my family situation in relation to custody and legalities in regard to access to my children, and now this unusual friend's demands were not welcome. This situation made me feel sad, yet I was very thankful to those genuine friends who advised me not to comply with his unreasonable demands. They advised me not to worry about anything, and Reg initially suggested and prepared a letter to our supposed friend about my current state. Apparently it was asking him now how long he would continue as a mature person with his current attitude towards me. Upon reception of that note, this so-called friend sent me a letter of condemnation, wherein he wrote that I was an evil man, and my children would be better off in their mother's loving care. Obviously he wrote it in complete rage and anger. I have since lost all contact with him. Besides, I had to move out from where I lived, with multiple problems in every possible aspect of my existence. I hoped something like that would never happen again, and I was not going to live the rest of my life with a guilty conscience over something for which I was not responsible. It was not my intention to cause any trauma to him or to anybody allegedly expected to simply by being me and, as I was often told, by my loving ex-partner. After all these years, I still think that I should have returned his $500 for the sake of peace. It was never easy to put my experiences under the microscope. Remember Socrates' wise words? Unexamined life is not worth living. After my return to Australia, I did not intend to stay long, but go back to London. However, there were a number of issues which needed to be finalized, and I hoped that it would not take too long. I had to rent a unit again in Williams Road, and was living like a fugitive and hermit, as if I was a criminal and in hiding. But what was my crime? Frightened by every creak and every door knock, I was already regretting my return. It felt as if I was living in a danger zone. Ever since, I was awakened in the very early hours of the morning in a very abusive and noisy way by officers of the then sheriff's office all those moons ago. I felt that I should not have come back. All the undesirable elements seemed to be directed at my person, almost in answer to a handful of hateful and angry people's prayers, for they opposed me in the severest possible way as dictated by their elders, who allegedly were highly knowledgeable of the Bible facts. However, I will say that they had based their assumptions on a multitude of lies and imagined wickedness on my part. Is this not the case with some people who were disfellowshipped because Jehovah's governing body needed to keep their organization sinless and clean? I decided to seek some consolation without having anything to do with my ex-family, which was bound to become non-existent within my stream of being. It was indeed a nightmarish existence, wherein I was seen unworthy even to live. I was shunned and hated forever under the banner of Jehovah's righteousness. However, being free from all that slavery and utter nonsense was priceless. Seeing me as unworthy, as I was often told by members of the religious order my partner followed, was apparently the will of our righteous Heavenly Father. Remembering the dwelling closer to Brighton Road next to the flower shop, I can never forget how my supposed daughter and her friends had thrown a stone through my window when my Armenian friend and her children were visiting me. I realized that my life was in great danger even then. Those ugly emotions I was subjected to became unbearably burdensome. Alas, I did not know that Magda had also gone to Perth after changing her and the children's names. On further consideration and analysis, the idea must have been simply to run away from a very violent and evil man with the children without realizing what she was doing was nothing other than abducting them so that they had no contact with their father, allegedly the ugly wizard who was casting evil spells. Since she was incapable of thinking for herself, in her confusion, she most certainly acted on advice given by her so-called brothers and sisters. Feeling utterly justified under those invented laws of the Jehovah's Witness organization, she only expected everything negative from me, taking every lie told as true. I wondered how she would react to circumstances if she was enabled to think independently and freed from the bondage of darkness. The new family name she chose might have been that of one of her lovers. Hopefully, I was not going too hastily in thinking along these lines, because the whole observed situation seemed to be dependent upon more sinister and mental health-related issue. Were we dealing with a form of phobia, psychosis, or narcissistic episodes? Was it dependent on genetic factors? Remember, our first child displayed similar states of consciousness. Herman Melville says, "Our lives are connected by 1,000 invisible threads, and along these sympathetic fibers our actions run as causes and return to us as results."